Start talking.
Oh, sorry. The second one's off. Okay. Hi, my name's Edie Maple, and I wanted to talk with you tonight about this book called It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. And, you know, when I started to write this book, I thought it was just going to be about the loss of a loved one. I thought that it was going to just talk to what happens for any of us when we lose someone close, when we lose someone dear. And it turned into so much more than just the loss of a loved one. It really, the conversation started with, where else do we have loss? Where else is there a sense in us that not only are we mourning maybe what was, but maybe what can't be? And welcome.
Thank you.
So I'd like to talk with you first about this cover. So the cover is kind of important, I think, because our covers are important. And the way that we exist in the world is important. The way that we move forward is important. And so this cover, you can see it's a person, not necessarily gendered in any way, jumping off of a cliff. And what I think is so potent about that is that in order to tangle with grief, one has to jump off the cliff. One must take that step and take a risk and take chances in ways that you could never have imagined. And that is the process of grief. That is the work of grief. To be willing to take that chance, to take that leap of faith. And in so doing, in taking that risk, you actually meet a part of yourself that you never knew existed. You meet a part of yourself that is humble. You meet a part of yourself that is scared. You meet a part of yourself that you may have never met. And it is in those moments that you can realize that grief is a gift, and that it comes through in so many different ways, that gift. Let me tell you a personal story, if I may. So, I believe that we are all born with, if you will, like a Buddha, okay? And I call it my little Buddha, but you may not necessarily call it your Buddha. You might call it just a sense of knowing. And for some of us, that sense of knowing, it stays with us forever. And it just keeps moving with us. But then sometimes that Buddha, and you call it whatever you want, that exists within you, disappears. Maybe it disappears when you're 2 or 3 or 4. Maybe your voice gets cut out or shut down. And that is trauma. It is also traumatic grief. It is also complicated grief. And for me, having my little Buddha, like, I saw the world. I wanted to save animals, and I wanted to, rescue the homeless, and, that's what I wanted to do. But somehow it didn't fit in, maybe with the world. And so that little Buddha had to find silence. And that was perhaps my first journey with grief. My first journey of saying, oh, wow, like, I'm going to have to hide. And it is in the hiding that the grief comes out. And so this book is not just about the journey of how one copes with the loss of a loved one, but truly the journey of the self. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if for anyone sitting here, if I see a lot of nods, if you haven't experienced a time when you wanted to have a voice and it disappeared, it was cut off in some way, or you wanted to love and it was cut off, or maybe that love disappeared and it was cut off, or maybe you faced an illness, or you faced some mountain top that just felt insurmountable, and that is, it's grief. So what I talk about here is honoring the self through this process and understanding that you will learn all the different parts of you. And actually, you learn, am I an introvert or an extrovert? And am I an ambivert? So an ambivert is where you're like moving in between. It's like sometimes you're introverted and all you want to do is go and hide. And that's the way you deal with the world, in your quiet time. And then sometimes, well, you're that extrovert and you want to go out and party and have a drink and have a good time. And that's what an ambivert is, going between those two worlds. So I see a lot of shaking heads. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. So I just want you to know that at any point, if you have a question or you're not understanding, I'm going to leave time throughout my conversation here for you to ask those questions. So bookmark them in your mind, because I really want to hear what they are. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you from parts of the book, and then I'm going to open this up for some questions, and then I'm going to read a little bit more and ask some questions, and then we'll kind of go from there, and I'll close with a story. So the second chapter is called Shall We Dance? And the title is The Dance, It's Grief, the Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. And I see that we must dance with it. We must dance with grief. We must partner with it. Because if we don't, it becomes our enemy. And when grief becomes your enemy, it's got its grip on you. And you know what it does? It's like glue. It's like quick glue. Have you ever experienced quick glue? It gets on your fingers and then you really can't like get your fingers apart, and it's like, and that's what grief is like when you don't dance with it. When you do dance with it, it's a whole different experience because it doesn't own you. You see it, you move with it, you dance with it, and it's kind of electric. So in the second chapter, Shall We Dance?
We made it.
You made it.
How
Hello.
are you?
Welcome.
Hi, Edie.
Hi. Mwah.
Amy.
And
Reunion.
Shall we dance? The dance of turning grief into grace involves learning who you are through the struggle. The experience of loss and mourning influences your sense of self. At the same time, the things you know to be true about yourself have influence on the way you mourn. This is the essence of the dance. There is a give and take between the familiar self you've always known and the self that is experiencing grief. Meeting the self at this potent juncture brings meaning to all the work you've done up to this point. The world becomes more real to you because you are more real to you. Every shift you make, every new nuance or behavior may be welcomed by a growing consciousness that you are not the same person you were. when you started the dance. Dance can be defined as an art form brought to life through a pattern of movement. I use the term dance frequently in this book to refer to the patterns of movement we experience in the active process of mourning. Sometimes the dance takes the form of disjointed movements that make absolutely no sense. A dance that emanates awkwardness is unstable, very much the way you feel when grief is new. Yet the dance can become stable and feels less fearful when you allow yourself to move into and recognize the pool of experiences and memories that lie within you. The dance can lead you into awareness, or the dance can allow you to stray from what needs to be addressed as a means of avoiding issues that present themselves. Fear, anger, anxiety, guilt, and regret are examples of the endless emotional choices available to you at any given moment during the process. Remember, you get to meet balance, peace, relief, gratitude, and hopefulness too. How you move with the various rhythms of your grief will determine where you ultimately land. Grief is an evolutionary process, and knowing how to dance with it requires the ability to calm and soothe yourself while in the midst of it all. The tools in this book will help you learn when you're balanced or calibrated and when you aren't. It's pretty hard to be in a balanced state when the soul is entwined with active grieving. You'll find that within each exercise, there is a progression of learning-based attempts at stabilization. What this means is your brain will be given different ways to think about what you're feeling. The exercises are progressive in nature. The more you engage with them, the more you actively teach the brain there is a way to alleviate the pain of the grief. Over time, grief moves and flows from a seemingly simple concept to a concept that is complex and layered. As you learn to develop a keen sense of the ebb and flow of your grief, the meaning of dancing with your grief will become clear in its ability to overpower you, flood you, and then recede. Flooding is something that occurs when there is too much stimulation and the emerging, often engulfing emotions cannot be managed. Being overwhelmed, afraid, and physically anxious feeds into a flooding experience. This flooding cycle often transpires when you're in the thick of grief and trauma. When the flooding is interrupted with concrete alternatives, such as breathwork, disrupting negative thought patterns, and physical exercise, it has a chance to shift. Dancing with your grief is expressed in two major ways. You understand how grief takes the lead, pushing you into a dance that you haven't chosen, while at other times you lead and take the dance where you want it to go. When you learn to master your responses to the dormant emotions that become alive and potent through this process, the mourning process will not be able to exploit you. Through the grief process, you will find the opportunity to explore your aptitude for resilience. You can then become the choreography of the dance, the choreographer of the dance, and an expert in how you engage. If you think of yourself as the one who leads the dance, you can give yourself and your psyche a message that the process is safe and you are in control. You'll come to learn that the dark emotions don't have to feel dangerous. They become your greatest allies. And in the quest to understand your discomfort and disconnection, you get peace and balance. Facing the demons of your loss and trauma will give your soul the message that you aren't backing down in this challenging dance. The dance with grief is much like the therapeutic process. In my practice, the pace is set by my clients and is a cyclic process of watching and waiting, creating a mutual tempo that establishes the partnership. We listen to the intonation in each other's voices. We watch for what is said and what is not said in the silences, in body language, and through the vitality of expression, utilizing all 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, sound, and sight. To assess and modulate the interactions, we ultimately form a relationship that allows us to vigilantly tackle the resistance, often present in the dance. The memory of a taste or a touch can seem so real that it's brought into the therapeutic experience. What is provoked and evoked is done with the notion of acquiring a sense of safety, yet drawing distinctions between safety, ambivalence, and complacency. During the therapeutic process, in thoughtful and artful ways, we enter an agreement that is constantly being renegotiated. Grief can be very tricky in the way it manifests in your soul. It demands consistent dialogue and an added awareness of how slippery it can be, because it can certainly be slippery. It takes an observing eye to take note of how you respond to emotional peaks and valleys. You need to assess and determine the degree of conviction you experience when meeting this partner, that is grief. Is it worth engaging? What will the outcome be if I commit to the relationship? It can be difficult to trust any partner at a first meeting, and this partner has come into your life unbidden. Additionally, prior to your experience of loss and trauma, you may not have known the demands this kind of relationship can make on the soul. Are you ready? Shall we dance? And so dance is a huge metaphor in our lives. How we decide to participate in dancing with the soul, dancing with the trauma, dancing with the grief. And I think that this is an important conversation. It's more than just the loss of a loved one. It is perhaps the loss of the self and the soul when we meet trauma, when we meet disappointment, when we've lost that Buddha that I was initially talking about, and how to renegotiate with that which we've lost. So as I said, I was going to open this up, I'm going to read a little bit, open this up for some questions, any thoughts you have, any experiences you've had, and then I'm going to read a little bit about grace and the goal of reaching to that ultimate place of what I call the 11 phases of grief, and that's grace, and finding a way to grace. So any thoughts, comments, what you've experienced in terms of your own loss of your Buddha, the metaphorical Buddha, or thoughts about the renegotiation or anything else, or any questions you might have. Yeah.
So lately, I'm having trouble with some steps in my choreography. It's not a loss of the person physically, but my niece has a transgender, and it's been very hard to deal with the loss that I know she's not going to be the person, and she's going to have a much more difficult life. So I wanted to know, what steps can I take to, deal with that type of grief, because it's not physical, it's all mental, and how to, I accept it, it's nothing to do with acceptance, but it's very difficult to have that type of grief that is just not there, or not a lot of people know how to deal with it. So I'm having a lot of troubles with that dance step and trying to take the lead and be the choreographer, but it's been difficult.
Such a great question, and the awareness around this is remarkable, because it's so hard. I work a lot with people who transition, and for friends and family and relatives, what often happens is they must mourn. They must mourn the person who is leaving that body.
Mhm.
they must say goodbye to the male or the female who is transitioning into another gender, the gender that they really have felt they have been their entire lives. And so you're going to go through a transition as they go through a transition. And to honor, that maybe you will transition together and you will learn from how they transition and they will learn from you. And it is perfectly fine to actually share your grief around it.
Mhm.
It is far better to say, I don't know what to do, than it is to act like it doesn't bother you because you want to be okay with it. And instead of miscommunicating with I'm okay with this, to give both answers, I'm okay and I'm grieving. And I want to learn how to be there for you. And I might need you to tell me sometimes. And I might not know what to do or what to say, but know that I'm with you 100% and I'm also proud of you. So you can dance in that way and have full ownership and create a mosaic. And this is a mosaic, this dance. And you're redefining what the puzzle is of this person's life. And you're going to participate in that as hard as it is and as exciting as it is. And with every grief, there's a gift. And who knows what's going to happen as a result of this transition. And she's going to be a different person. And she may have actually stopped herself from committing suicide, because suicide in that world is very, very high. So by taking ownership, you haven't lost a life. You've actually gained a life and maybe gained a voice and learned something that you never knew. So be curious. And that's what I also talk about, is being curious. And this is part of that grace, is that curiosity. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope that helped.
You did. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions or thoughts? Yeah, hi, what's your name?
Hamima.
Hamima, hi, I'm
Hi.
Edie.
I ended an abusive relationship, and I was having a hard time with it because I was grieving. And even though I knew I had to go, I kind of feel like I still love him, but I know that that's not right. Feeling, obviously stupid for having stayed so long. I'm trying to not allow myself to feel that way. So that's why I'm here, to learn how to grieve the positive that I did get.
Yeah.
And be at peace with just my
Your journey.
my leaving that behind and moving forward.
So one of the things that I talk about in the book, and it's actually being spoken about everywhere, and it's about the brain, and it's about how wonderful the brain is. And the brain is one of your greatest allies. And so your brain is also a trickster, okay? It likes to fool you into thinking that you're stupid. And there's nothing stupid about you, or what you think, or what you do. You did what you needed to do, and that was your journey. And so the first piece might be, and I talk about this, is you need to find different cognitions, which are thoughts, and change that stupid thought. And how would you change it into something that's more positive? So no, I'm not stupid, I'm confused. I can live far better with confusion than I can with stupid. Stupid doesn't get me anywhere. But confusion, or I did what I needed to do at that time and now I'm awake, well, there's nothing like awakening. And And there's nothing like grief to awaken you. So this love might have been the best thing that ever happened to you because you're now at this place of grief and loss. And who knows where that's going to lead you. Does that make sense?
Yes. I had a more specific question because I don't. I'm working around that stupid part. I feel
That's
really
good.
comfortable with who I am and what happened, and I'm putting it away. I think what I want to get to more is to be able to maybe honor or keep or set aside that feeling that I received of love, right? The positive stuff.
Yeah.
Without wanting it and to just set it aside. So to grieve it and just say, okay, you know, that's fine. That was okay, that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
want to do.
Good. So, do it. Because you've got that power. Just keep making it happen. Just do it. Thank you. Yeah. Hi.
Could you talk a little bit about grief as an awakening? Like as a, you just said something about that. I thought that was interesting.
So,
Isn't that what you said?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is what I said. I also said, I talked about how grief is, that there are gifts in grief.
Mhm.
Okay, and so if we think about, there are, we think about, for example, MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And this woman was able to take the loss of her daughter through a drunk driver, and she manifested MAD. And now, if I say MAD, M-A-D-D, everybody knows what MAD is. And that was a manifestation of that loss. If we think about Oprah, and we think about all of the losses that she incurred in her life, and how she manifested, and she really shifted that grief into her greatness. And we're all great. It's just what gets in the way, right? So what gets in the way of our greatness can sometimes be a misdiagnosis of anxiety when it's really grief, or depression when it's really grief. It's not that we don't have malaise, but sometimes the umbrella is that grief. And when we can look at something and say, wow, there's grief here, and that is what's really going on, then that's a lot, it's a lot easier to say, okay, you know what, I'm gonna learn how to live with this. And it's not gonna take me over, it's not gonna grip me, I'm gonna morph as a result of it. And that learning, personally, so I am a survivor of sexual abuse. I was pretty badly bullied growing up, and I lost my first love to cancer, and this was all before I was 25. And had I not had all of those experiences, especially the loss of my first love, I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be talking about grief. I'd be training in the corporate world. But because of Paul's death and what he taught me, there was no way that I could do that. I needed to do this. So it was a gift, and it was a recreation of the self, and having to ground me in ways that I never knew existed. Because when you are a survivor, you're all over the place. You're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. You can't concentrate. People are talking to you. You're not hearing. And that's grief and that's trauma. And it's all mixed up. But
when something happens within that grief moment that is an aha moment, and you go, oh, I don't have to, it doesn't have to grip me. I can learn from this. What were the lessons? What were some of the lessons? Oh, it's like, it's an aha moment. And then you morph, you metamorphosize, you shift, you change the way you talk to somebody, the way you hold on to anger, the way you hold on to a love. It changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a resurrection of the soul. So thank you so much for all of this sharing, and questions. So
Dee, I have one more question.
yeah.
So you're talking about your little Buddha, and I really like that concept because I think it's really powerful to say that all of your knowledge is inside of you, and it's really important to recognize that. But how do you get from your little Buddha to having that awakening? Because if you're confused and you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do, how do you handle that?
So this little Buddha metaphor is, it's a reckoning of the self. It's going through the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is really meeting the darkest part of the self. And I see that as grief and loss. And it's like you must be an alchemist. And the best definition of alchemy I found is the ability to turn dirt into gold. And so it is saying, I recognize that something got lost. It's being able to track it and document it, and to be able to identify what is it that I felt like I lost. My voice, my heart, my gut, my role. I talk about the 11 phases of grief. I lost who I am. I'm angry all the time. Well, when you're angry all the time, you don't have your soul, because all you are is angry. So it is really being able to identify and map it out, and actually creating, like I created a Buddha diagram, and Buddha was up at the top, and it's like, okay, so what are all the benefits of Buddha, and what did I feel, what did I lose, and how do I start to honor little Buddha again? And once I can start to hear the voice of that little Buddha, like I'm allowed to have a voice, or I can be curious, or I can save animals. And an example of my little Buddha is, so I live in New York City. And in New York City, there are many homeless people. And the thing about the homeless is you kind of have to pick one. If you're gonna be with one, you're gonna pick one. So I picked this one wonderful woman. I didn't know why I was picking her. She always wears blue. It's you see the blue in your shirt, this blue? There's like a blue-green, okay? That's the color. She only wears that color, okay? And she's an artist, and she paints, and she doesn't speak, as if somebody has cut out her tongue. And she has never spoken to me, or I think to anyone, at least since she's been on the streets. That's my story. But I see her, and I see that my little Buddha gets a chance to exist with her. She doesn't even know it. But I get to take care of her in my way. I get to give her money, and she writes me notes on my phone, because I have a Note 8, and I give her my stylus, and I ask her to write me notes, and she writes me notes, and she says, could you get me some canvas and paints? She's a homeless woman on the streets of New York City. And so I go to Michael's, and I get her a canvas pad, and I get her some paints. Acrylics. They have to be acrylics, by the way, okay? So I get her these acrylics, and I'm my little Buddha. And I'm going, and I'm getting, and I realize, okay, now she's homeless. I can't really give her this big pad. That's not gonna really work for her. Like, how is she gonna transport it? So I take out some of the pages, because I know I'm gonna keep seeing her. And I roll up the pages, and I give her a paintbrush, which I tape to the canvas, and I give her some paints, and I roll it all up, and I give it to her. And she stands up. She's never spoken to me. She takes it and she bows like she does. And she says, thank you. And there's my little Buddha. There's my little Buddha right there. And I don't know what made her tongue get cut out, but it was the loss of her little Buddha. And I must say, she's clean. She does not smell. She's lovely. And when I buy food for her, do you know what she asks me to get her? Health food. Health food. Would you get me yogurt? Will you get me a Kind bar? Health food. And there's my little Buddha. And there's a healing of the grief. So service, which is also something that I talk about in the book, service is so important to healing, to give to another. It's so potent. So I'm just going to read a little bit more, and if you then have any other questions, we can just go with that.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have a previous engagement,
Okay.
but I wanted to come in.
Thank you.
Very much.
It's a little stuck here. Here we go. This is the last phase of the 11 phases. It's called grace. Grief is a teacher. Grace is peace. Grace is calm. Grace is flying. Grace is I am. Grace is coming out intact. Grace is abundance. Grace is beauty. Grace is breath. Grace is divine. Grace is duty. Grace is coming out alive. Grace is surviving. Grace is positive. Grace is knowing. Grace is understanding. Grace is role shifting. Grace is a journey. Grace is infinite. Grace is. Grace lends a certain dignity to the phases and gives the dance a special beauty. It transforms past pain into present pleasures with fluidity, calm, and serenity. It encourages self-fulfillment. It lets you choose what will and won't define you. When you're in grace, you come to understand that grief doesn't have to define who you are. It becomes an experience that you've had because it engages only parts of the whole self. I use the term grace to exemplify a type of internal spirit that encourages you to step into your transformed life through a relationship with your newfound tenacity and courage. The beauty of the dance emerges and is enhanced by you being grounded and balanced. Your healing psyche has gone through its own death and rebirth, and you've acquired emotional assets that can be counted on forever. The last phase honors your new understanding of the self. Touching grace in part impacts the depths of your soul to such a degree that the journey of moving through your trauma and loss takes on spiritual and divine connotations. You conquer the darkness and move into a light of your own creation. And so